find a lot of empty shelters on any spice bush plant. It's more common to find empty ones than filled ones. The pipevine swallowtail, carrying on with the swallowtails, feeds on pipevine, which is a plant that will do well, of course, any place a vine would, a trellis, a fence, any place where it can climb. It has those really cool looking flowers, which is why it's called pipevine. Those flowers are ultimately pollinated by flies that get in there because it smells like something rotting, and they pollinate it while they're inside. The pipevine swallowtail butterfly is just fascinating to look at as both the butterfly and the caterpillar. The caterpillar, as you can see there, is really fantastic looking. It has some warning colors itself. It is distasteful, like a monarch, and most predators will avoid it, or at least they only taste one. And if you could see the underside of the butterfly, which you can't see in this particular picture, it also has red spots going all up and down it, because the butterfly is distasteful as well. Now, a neat thing about the pipevine, as the bottom bullet point says, is they are gregarious, meaning lots of them will hang out in one place. So if you do have pipevine, it can be easier to find these guys than many, because if a female lays eggs on it, there'll often be lots of eggs and lots of caterpillars. It's a really cool thing to find. So the zebra swallowtail, one of, I think, our most beautiful butterflies here in Missouri, feeds on pawpaw. And it's pretty loyal to the places where pawpaw grows. So the butterfly house is in Faust Park. There happens to be some pawpaw there, so we see these guys from time to time. But typically you don't see them, though of course you might see them venturing into your yard for nectar or something, but typically you don't feed them far away from pawpaw groves. So if you want to see more of these guys, and I'll show you what they look like, if you want to see more of these beautiful zebra swallowtails, take a walk in the woods in a place where there's lots of pawpaw. Now, the caterpillar is really hard to find, though. All of these guys that hang out on trees are. But with some luck, looking on fairly young pawpaw trees where the leaves and branches are fairly close to the ground, you can find them. So then there's the eastern tiger swallowtail. I would say that the eastern tiger swallowtail is probably another very familiar butterfly to most people. It's another caterpillar that can be found on trees. Its preferred trees, at least in our area, are sweet bay magnolia and tulip tree. It can also be found on cherries, and it can also be found on hop tree. Though, as I'll cover in a second, hop tree is more commonly associated with a different swallowtail, but without a doubt, eastern tiger swallowtails can be found on it. But eastern tiger swallowtails are most commonly going to be found on sweet bay magnolia or tulip tree. This is what the eastern tiger swallowtail looks like. As a caterpillar, again, it's another snake mimic. And also as a caterpillar, it's going to be pretty hard to find because it's usually up in the trees. But if you are taking a walk and there's lots of small tulip trees or small sweet bay magnolias, you can look on those smaller saplings and you stand a chance of finding some there. But that adult butterfly, the yellow and black tiger swallowtail, is a familiar sight to many people. It's also one of our largest butterflies here in Missouri. One thing to distinguish it from the caterpillar that's coming next, the giant swallowtail, look closely at the feet of the caterpillar here, and you can see that it actually spins a little mat of silk for itself to sit in. Well, the giant swallowtail does not do that. So if you have any doubt at all whether it is an eastern tiger swallowtail or a giant swallowtail caterpillar, the eastern tiger swallowtail makes that little mat of silk and sits in it. So I'm going to show you the giant swallowtail, which is the one I was alluding to. That's this one. First, it's host plants. The giant swallowtail feeds on hop tree and prickly ash, two members of the citrus family that can be grown here. Hop tree is reasonably common around here. We see it a lot in the woods around the butterfly house. And here is the giant swallowtail caterpillar. So if you're thinking about what the eastern tiger swallowtail looked like that I just showed you, you're probably thinking, well, that one looks like a bird dropping and the other one was green. How would you ever confuse them? Well, a young eastern tiger swallowtail caterpillar is a bird dropping mimic like the one you see here. So the opportunity for confusion comes when you're looking at young caterpillars, because a young tiger swallowtail is pretty easy to confuse for this. So that's when you look for that silk pad at the feet, and only the tiger swallowtail has that. So the giant swallowtail that we're looking at here can be actually pretty common in our area in the summer. It does not overwinter here in any shape or form. It only overwinters in the southern states, but it moves up into Missouri in the summer, and you definitely can find its caterpillars. That photograph is one I took around the butterfly house of a giant swallowtail caterpillar in our area. Okay, so that covers the swallowtails. Now we're moving on to the group of butterflies, the family Nymphalidae, known as the brushfoot butterflies. And we're going to start with the American lady, which actually feeds on pussy toes. Pussy toes is a neat little plant. It can be used as a ground cover. I don't know that it's a very popular garden plant, but it's nice as a little ground cover, a little spring blooming plant. This is what the American lady caterpillar looks like. I think it's neat to try growing pussy toes just to try to get this caterpillar. That's a pretty cool looking caterpillar with the maroon stripes and the yellow stripes and the black spikes. This is one of several caterpillars that has spikes, but the spikes aren't stinging. So if you do see one of these, it's perfectly okay to pick it up, though some would say that you need to, and I tend to agree, you need to be careful handling any caterpillar just because they're very soft and fragile, and the chance of damaging them without meaning to can be quite high. But you don't have to worry about being stung by this guy. And there's the adult American lady next to it. So a very closely related butterfly to the American lady is the painted lady. So the painted lady, Vanessa cardui is the scientific name of the painted lady. And cardui actually refers to thistle, because the most common host plant for the painted lady is thistles. And without a doubt, you'll find them on thistles. Not many people want to grow thistles in their yard, though, and quite many thistles should not be grown or cultivated in any way, because many of the common ones around here are noxious weeds that have been introduced from elsewhere. But other plants that you can find painted lady caterpillars on are hollyhocks, burdock, and perhaps a few other plants in the mallow family as well. So many people grow hollyhocks. It's a common garden plant. Many people also don't recommend you grow them because they can't escape cultivation. Burdock grows like a weed around here, and not too many people grow it in their gardens either. But painted ladies are occasionally found, like I said, on other members of the mallow family, which can include some hibiscuses, including the native hibiscuses that some people do grow. It's just not their preferred host plant. So I wouldn't be surprised if you are growing hibiscus if you never find a painted lady caterpillar on it. Now there's what a painted lady caterpillar and butterfly look like. The caterpillar can be quite variable. The white one that you see there, that's not always the way they appear. Sometimes they're darker brown. Sometimes they can be quite a lot of different colors. So knowing what plant you find it on can be an important clue. Painted ladies also build nests out of silk, meaning basically kind of like, picture the webworms that get up in trees and cover themselves in webbing. Well, these guys don't cover the whole plant like that, but they will kind of make a nest of silk kind of like that, just centered around one leaf that they hide in. And there's the painted lady butterfly, which is a pretty common sight, at least in butterfly form, around here for many people. Okay, so the Buckeye butterfly. Again, for my money, one of our most beautiful butterflies. I'll show you the butterfly in a second. So its host plants are the wild petunias, also snapdragons. And this is another one that's kind of weird because it can feed on plants in several different plant families. One of its most frequented native hosts is actually a very poorly known semi-parasitic plant called false foxglove, genus Agalinus. This is a plant that you can see growing in the wild in places like Shaw Nature Reserve or other fairly undisturbed places. And because it is kind of semi-parasitic, it's not one that you can just buy at a nursery and plop into your garden. I really wish I could, because the last time I took a walk in a place where there was this plant growing, I saw tons of buckeye caterpillars. It was really quite amazing. But you will from time to time see them on the wild petunia and snapdragons and other plants that they feed from. And here's what the buckeye caterpillar and butterfly look like. So that butterfly is pretty common in our area, especially in fall, has beautiful eye spots. Many people think that, there aren't so many butterflies outside the tropics that have eye spots, but there definitely are. There's one right there. The caterpillar itself is quite beautiful, typically has an orange head and then blue-black patterning all the way down the body. It's another one that has spines but will not sting. The pearl crescent. Pearl crescents feed on asters, and there are many different kinds of asters that you can get. They're not very picky about what kind of aster. Asters, I'll make a note here because I really like asters as a late season nectar source for butterflies. I encourage everyone to include asters in their gardens just for nectar, just because when monarchs are migrating south or other late season butterflies are around, you'll have a lot of them that will make use of your asters that bloom at that time. Now here is what a pearl crescent caterpillar looks like in the pearl crescent butterfly. And I will tell you that the pearl crescent is one of the most common butterflies in our area. And I will also share that they are incredibly hard to find in the caterpillar stage. I've personally never seen one. They're very small. Aster plants get very big. And I think you would have to do a very dedicated hunt to find this small caterpillar on the big plants. And yet, like I said, pearl crescents are very common. So they're clearly reproducing and doing very, very well. A commonly related one to the pearl crescent is the silvery checker spot, which feeds on sunflowers. There are many native species of sunflowers to choose from. This is Maximilian sunflower, lots that you could pick from. I don't know, because people have asked me before if they prefer or will use some of the cultivated sunflowers like the mammoth kind and whatnot. I don't know of any reason why they wouldn't, but I don't have any firm data on that. Here's what silvery checker spot caterpillars look like. They're another one like the pipevine swallowtail that can be gregarious. So it's kind of nice for those of us who are caterpillar hunters. If you find one of these guys, you're probably going to find several of them on your plant, and you'll see them probably feeding right out in the open in the middle of the day. And there's the silvery checker spot butterfly, which at first glance, and I might flip back 2 slides, I'll show you a pearl crescent again. That's a pearl crescent. Very similar looking to the silvery checker spot. So because they're so hard to tell apart, what you want to look for on the silvery checker spot butterfly is at the very, not the very, very bottom, like along the edge, but right in the middle of that orange band. Do you see the little silver spots? This isn't quite like a laser pointer, so sorry if this looks really weird, but I'm talking about right there. Those are the silvery checker spots that give it its name, and that's the good field character to look for to tell it apart. Okay. So the cloudless sulfur. Now we've left the nymphalids, the brushfoot butterflies, and we're looking at sulfur butterflies, so called because they're usually bright yellow, like elemental sulfur. They can also be orange or white, but some variety of that. Now the cloudless sulfur feeds on partridge pea, which we're looking at here. Partridge pea is really a very nice plant. It's got beautiful yellow flowers. It's got really attractive foliage to look at. A warning to you, if you're going to plant it, it will reseed itself. And it over a period of years tends to form a fairly large colony or group of plants. But if you know that going in and are prepared to pull up the little plants that come up in the spring when you're doing your other weeding, it's really not that bad. Just know that it's a reseeder. But it's a very nice plant and definitely will attract the cloudless sulfur, which you can see here. So if you look at the butterfly first, the reason it's called cloudless sulfur is because the wings are solid yellow with no black or brown markings. There are other butterflies that are sulfurs in our area called the clouded sulfur because their wings have black splotches. Those are the clouds. One other thing I'll say about this caterpillar is that if you do decide to try growing partridge pea, it's pretty reliable to see this appear. For some other caterpillars that I'm mentioning, you could grow the host plant for an awfully long time and maybe never see the caterpillar. But I have found that these guys tend to come to the partridge pea year after year after year. So it's a nice one if you actually want to see more caterpillars in your garden. Okay. And a good way to find them, because they do start out kind of small, is to actually look for holes that have been chewed in the leaves. And if you look at the bottom picture there, you can see the caterpillar's green, the leaves are green, very good camouflage. But if you start your search for the caterpillar by looking for leaves that have been chewed up, then you can know where to look more closely for the very well camouflaged caterpillar. So I was mentioning other sulfurs like the clouded sulfur, where there's alfalfa and orange sulfurs. Big surprise, the alfalfa sulfur really likes alfalfa, but it will use other legumes too, like sweet clover. They'll also use the white clover that's in everybody's lawn. They'll use other clovers too. And here is what these butterflies look like. And I am actually talking about two species of butterfly, the alfalfa and the orange sulfur. These are recognized as two species. However, even experienced butterfly watchers will tell you they're very difficult to tell apart. And when you're looking at the caterpillar, you'll find that you can't really tell the caterpillar apart. You have to rear it to the butterfly to be able to know if it was the alfalfa or the orange sulfur. One really good way to see these caterpillars, though, because because clover and all these plants are so very, very common in our city parks and our yards and stuff. If you do happen to see one of these female butterflies visiting your yard and she's flitting around close to the ground, she might be laying eggs. So if you see her doing that, kind of landing on the ground and stopping, and there don't seem to be any flowers around, so she's probably not nectaring, she might be laying eggs. And if you walk up to the plant she's visited after she flies away, you might actually be able to find the eggs and observe it over the period of time while the caterpillar grows. Really cool thing to do. So the eastern-tailed blue, we've moved into another family of butterflies, which are called the blues and the hair streaks. The eastern-tailed blue, not unlike the butterflies we were just looking at, feeds on legumes like sweet clover and bush clover and other legumes besides. Here's what it looks like. Now, if you look at the butterfly very, very carefully, do you see those little tails on the back ends of the wing? They're as thin as eyelashes. And in many, many butterflies, they do get broken off. But when you do see them, you'll say, oh, that's why it's called the eastern tailed blue. And it's a very small butterfly too, I should mention. I think many of us see these more often than we realize, but we mistake them for a moth, or we mistake them for maybe something that's not even a butterfly, some other flying insect, just because they're so small and they typically hug the low plants just along the grass level. One interesting thing, like the second bullet there says, is that these caterpillars, along with several other members of this family, have actually developed kind of a partnership with ants. And in many places in the tropics, they can actually vibrate or scrape parts of their bodies against other parts of their bodies, which produces an audible sound that ants can hear. And this attracts the ants to defend them from whatever might be threatening them. So they've actually developed a working partnership with ants where the ants will protect them. And in turn, the caterpillar feeds the ants secretion of sweet liquid. It's a very cool symbiosis. Okay. So then a few more butterflies to cover, and we're going to talk about some common moths. We're going to talk about a skipper now, the silver spotted skipper, which feeds on false indigo, locust trees, and again, other legumes. One thing about skipper caterpillars is that they actually make a shelter for themselves, kind of like the spice bush swallowtail that I started talking about. Here is what a skipper caterpillar shelter will look like. Inside those leaves, which have actually been sewn together with caterpillar silk, you can see the caterpillar. This is a series of pictures that I took when I found one of these. So the caterpillar that you see up in the corner was actually inside those stitched together leaves. And then that's what the adult silver spotted skipper looks like. It's a very easy skipper to recognize in our area because of that big white silver spot. Many other skippers are very hard to tell unless you have a photo or something to kind of, slow them down so you can consult your field guide. But the silver spot really stands out, and it's also a bigger butterfly than most skippers are. So this is one that you can recognize. All right. So I definitely didn't cover all of the butterflies that we have in our area, but those are without a doubt some of the most common ones that we have. And what I'd like to do for the remainder of my time is cover a few really exceptional caterpillars that you will encounter that just happen to grow up to be moths. So we're going to start with the woolly bear and their relatives. Woolly bear caterpillars all belong to the tiger moth family. And the most common woolly bear is probably the red and black guy there in the center. But there are others around here, including one that's called the great leopard moth. That grows up into a beautiful white moth with black speckles, very much like a leopard. And the yellow bear down there, and there's a variety of others besides, but they all turn into what are called tiger moths. None of them sting, so you don't have to worry about picking these guys up. Woolly bears don't sting. And as far as what they eat, it might be easier to talk about what they don't eat, honestly. They are polyphagous to the extreme. They break the host plant rule like crazy, and they eat pretty much every plant that commonly grows around here. So tent caterpillars, this is another one that's very, very familiar to many people. There's a very similar one found in the fall called the fall webworm. So this is the tent caterpillar that tends to occur in the spring. And the fall webworm, as you can imagine, tends to occur in the fall. So you can see the tent over there in the photo, and that's probably a familiar sight to many of you from walks around or even from your own yard. A lot of people worry about those and worry about them hurting their trees. In my experience, and I will qualify this saying this is not the experience of an arborist, it's the experience of an entomologist. They don't really seem to kill trees, though for a very young tree that certainly hasn't gotten a lot of leaves or a lot of branches going, there's probably more reason to worry about those trees for sure. But on a mature tree that happens to have the little tent on the end of one branch, it doesn't really seem to be a reason to worry about the health of the tree. Again, for any tree that you have that might be a younger tree, might be more reason to watch it more closely and possibly remove it. The caterpillars themselves, um, in my childhood, for sure, one of my most familiar caterpillars, because we used to find them roaming around. Very fuzzy, very soft, very fun to hold. And the adult moth is, if you didn't know it was that, would be pretty hard to tell apart from a lot of the other moths that are around. Mothing is a fascinating thing. The more I learn about moths, the more I realize how much variety and fascination there is. But it is true that you have to really learn a lot to tell them apart because there's a great many of them out there. So then there's the milkweed tussock moth. This is a caterpillar found on milkweed. So as I mentioned when we talked about milkweed before, there's a whole community there. The nice thing about the community is it works and plays together. Most monarch caterpillars in our area are done being caterpillars, have turned into adults, and are migrating to Mexico by the time these guys show up. So by the time you have milkweed tussock moth caterpillars on your milkweed, they probably won't be outcompeting your monarchs because the monarchs have typically, there's always late season monarchs that are stragglers. You've probably seen some on your milkweeds, but typically most monarchs are done being caterpillars by the time these guys show up so they can share the milkweed plants. This is a native caterpillar, so it's not some introduced thing. It's always been here, and it's pretty much always shared the milkweed with all the other things that live on milkweed. And you can see the moth over there. This is actually another member of the tiger moth family, same as the woolly bears. And then there's a couple really spectacular moths in our area that many people would say are among the most spectacular insects we have in Missouri. So I'm going to go over a few of them. As a family, they're known as the giant silkworm moths. And the first one that you're going to see here is the Polyphemus moth. This is one of the big brown moths. I didn't include a slide about the Cecropia moth, but I think it's probably the only thing you could possibly mistake the Polyphemus for. Polyphemus moth is very big, and if you look at the eyes that appear on the wing, they're usually surrounded by that dark, almost like it has a black eye or is wearing eyeshadow. So that can be a good thing to look for on them. Now with the caterpillar, if you get lucky enough to find one of these caterpillars, it's huge. It's like a big green walking hot dog. It's a very, very big, chunky caterpillar. And the Polyphemus moth caterpillar can be recognized by being bright lime green, and then it has those slanting yellow lines cutting up vertically. They pass through where the spiracle is on each segment. So that's what you want to look for, bright lime green, except for those upward moving slashing marks. In contrast to the Luna moth, which I think many people would consider to be the most beautiful moth or butterfly probably in our area. And its caterpillar looks a lot like the Polyphemus moth caterpillar. But what you want to notice is that it doesn't have those slanting marks going through its spiracles. Instead, it has a faint line running down the midline of its body. And at the very top of the abdominal segments, it does have a little bit of yellow. So no lines cutting through the middle of each segment like Polyphemus had, but instead a little bit of yellow around the top of each segment and that longitudinal line going through the middle of the body. Now, one thing I'll say about this and Polyphemus is that they feed on a wide variety of trees. You can see the list there: birch, hickory, persimmon, sweet gum, walnut, many, many others. The same is true for Polyphemus. So again, like some of the swallowtails we talked about, you may not see one of these unless you look at a really small young tree. Or again, you might get really lucky and find one on a low-hanging branch of a tree in your yard. It's always a real treat to find them. And I will say, of all the caterpillars that we've talked about, my favorite is the one I'm going to conclude with. This one, the regal moth caterpillar. The caterpillar itself has a common name. It's called the hickory horn devil. And there's absolutely nothing devilish about it except that the horns on it kind of gave someone that thought. This is a behemoth caterpillar, one of the biggest, if not the biggest, we have in our area. And there is absolutely nothing that looks anything like it. That long green body with the tendrils coming off the head. There's one closely related species in the same genus as this guy that only feeds on pine, and you'll probably never see in Missouri. It's called the pine devil, usually. And like I say, it's found along the East Coast and in the Southeast, and only feeds on pine. So if you ever see a caterpillar that has those big horns like that, that's 5 inches long, as big around as a hot dog, that's the regal moth. And it's a really spectacular beast to behold. So with that, I will say, does anybody have any questions for me? And I will thank you all again for inviting me tonight. I've really appreciated having the chance to talk to you all.
Chris, this has been a fantastic presentation. So much appreciate you being able to do it by this method too, because obviously we wouldn't be able to have these advanced training opportunities if you weren't willing to step up and step in. So anybody does want to talk, obviously you can unmute. I can unmute everybody if you like, though. But oh, there goes Sharon.
I have a question. Chris, what's the fundamental difference between a moth and a butterfly?
The fundamental difference?
Yeah.
I wish it was that easy to give one fundamental difference. Nature always likes to have exceptions. Generally, you can recognize most moths because they fly after dark, and most butterflies fly during the day. That is true. Now, of course, there are a number of moths that fly during the day, like a lot of really colorful ones, the hummingbird moths or the sphinx moths, they all fly during the day. So a lot of people will tell you to look at the antenna. The antenna of most moths are feathery, like a little feather, or they start out really thick and taper to a very thin point. So they're thick where they join the head, very thin at the point. Those are moth antennae.
Great.
Butterfly antennae, on the other hand, are going to look like a piece of thread with a club at the end. So they're going to be very thread-like, except at the end they make a little ball, like a club. Those are the best ways that I can know, because I can't tell you that all moths are drab. We just saw a couple of really beautiful ones at the end of the presentation. And I certainly can't tell you that all butterflies are colorful either.
Great. Thank you.
Sharon? Sharon, yeah, there you go.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes.
I think your presentation was fabulous. Joni Park and I do the butterfly monitoring out at Shaw.
Oh, cool.
And so I've never seen all these caterpillars, but a lot of the butterflies we do see out there.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you so much. One of the questions I have, the last time I went to the butterfly house with my grandkids, I did not see any displays of our own butterflies, native butterflies from Missouri at our own butterfly house. Was I just looking in the wrong place? They have butterflies from all over the world. And it would be great to teach them. These are all the butterflies we have here.
So are you talking about with
Not there.
the butterfly house where the living butterflies or a kind of mounted display?
Anything, mounted display or anything. There's nothing there unless I'm mistaken.
Well, so what we have is the whole outdoor garden area is devoted to native butterflies. And since we can't stock it, visitors, of course, can only see the butterflies that happen to be visiting there. I will say that we're always looking for ways to kind of improve on our educational stuff, what we have out for guests to see. And that particular aspect of what we have is one thing we are trying to improve upon. So whether it is a mounted display of natives or print materials or something like that, that is something that I hope you will be able to find, hopefully this year at the Butterfly House.
Okay, I really appreciate that.
Sure.
I think that would be important to have our own butterflies on a regular display. Love the presentation. Very nice. Really enjoyed it.
Important to say that we've tried to make a point with the actual butterfly display of only including tropicals, not just because they're cool for people to see, but we want people to know and understand that the way to see more butterflies is to plant the native plants that we are demonstrating.
Sure.
And so we've tried to kind of make the point that, like, if you build it, they will come, and that kind of thing, and educate people about that too.
I understand. Thank you.
Sure.
I can't see every picture, so if you've got a question, just go and unmute and step on somebody else and ask away. So I'll ask one too. I don't look for that very much. I take it pretty much every neighborhood. If you've got enough foliage out there somewhere, trees. I'm always amazed at some of these few folks who find birds I never see, or owls or something like that I never see. So it's just a matter of looking more closely within your environment, right?
Absolutely. And there are going to be a lot of caterpillars out there. Of course, I covered mostly butterflies and a few really big moths, but the vast majority of caterpillars that you're going to run into are going to be moth caterpillars because they outnumber the butterflies many, many, many times over. And if you're into insects, when you stop and look closely at anything, you'll find insects there that you never realized because so many of them are so tiny.
Bruce, can you recommend a good field guide?
I can, actually. And if you will forgive me moving around a little bit, because I left it on the other side of the room, I will show you my favorite one for caterpillars. So I would recommend you all pick up Caterpillars of Eastern North America by David Wagner. This is a very, very good book, and it's thick. So it has a lot of information in there, but you know, it's organized by family. So if you want to start with just learning the butterflies in your area or the giant silkworm moths or whatever, you can get that. But really, the reason this is the best book, I think, to start with, even better than a smaller field guide, is just because unlike some butterfly field guides where they might tell you what plants they're on, here you're actually going to get pictures of the caterpillars, really good pictures of the caterpillars and really good descriptions of the caterpillars. So that's why I think it's good to have, even though it is kind of a big first step.
Great, thank you.
I have a question. Bob.
Yes.
If you talk about a host plant, like you say, the golden Alexanders, do they also use the heart-leafed Alexanders? Is it like genus and not just specific species?
Yes, they do. With the Zizzy in particular, they will use heartleaf and the golden Alexander.
And like for the pussy toes, the alternaria and the neglecta, because I have the prairie pussy toes, and I haven't seen any butterflies on them or caterpillars on them, but I may not have looked enough.
As far as I know, for those, yes, they will. I'm certain with the black swallowtail. I would say it's very likely with the American ladytooth.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Very, very good presentation.
Thank you.
I have one. How do I get on here? Okay. Chris, that was great. I learned a lot.
Thanks.
My question is, I never get a lot of caterpillars, and I'm wondering if it's because of how many birds I have. Is there a big predation on caterpillars where their chances of survival are slim?
So birds do prey on a lot of caterpillars, that's for sure. When birds are raising their babies, they take so many caterpillars and other insects, and that's really a very important food source for them. So that might be part of it for sure. I obviously can't tell you for sure. I know why there's not so many caterpillars in your yard. Are you growing a great variety of host plants?
I try. I do have a severe deer problem, so they struggle to survive, but I do have milkweed and other native plants, but and I have seen caterpillars, but I'm always afraid that the birds are getting the majority.
The only thing that I'll say, which will hopefully reassure you some, is, for as long as there's been caterpillars and birds, the birds have been eating them. So the caterpillars do have their defenses. And, whether it's camouflage or a bad taste or scaring them away or whatever, I know the birds don't get them all. So hopefully that's not what's happening to all your caterpillars.
Okay, thanks.
Mm-hmm.
Pam, do you have parsley?
No, I have started growing dill. I may go get some parsley though. I'd like to see those.
The black swallowtails have been on mine, just one little plant, and I overwintered 3 of them this year. But every year I've had them on parsley. I've got tons of birds, so that might be a good shot if you.
All right, thanks, Carl.
Yeah, and the only other thing I'd say is I know that you can find caterpillars in pretty much any garden that has a lot of good host plants. The problem is that the caterpillars are such good hiders. And really they try to hide from the predators, and that also makes them really good hiders from us. So sometimes it's just a matter not just of getting lucky to have them in the first place, but getting lucky to find them. So I wish you good luck with that.
I thought I saw one more question out there. There you go. Awesome.
I just wanted to ask him, because we were hiking at Hahn State Park, and I get so excited when I see the zebra swallowtail. And so does that mean, is the pawpaw the only host plant?
Yeah.
Zebra.
It's the
Oh.
only one for zebra.
So the flowers that it was flowering at that time then when I saw them, the zebra swallowtails.
Well, they don't only need the nectar from the pawpaw. They can actually nectar from any flowering plant if that's what you're asking.
Oh, okay. Okay. So it was the caterpillar.
Correct.
It needs to leave.
Yeah.
And then, but I was actually seeing the butterflies. So.
Yeah.
But I have, last year you talked to us and this year, and you are wonderful.
Thank you.
And
Yes.
Everybody's got to unmute to give a big applaud there for Chris, right?
Thank you.
Great job.
And I do appreciate it. Again, you're our first speaker on a Zoom meeting like this, so
Okay.
this proves that it works well. So much appreciated. Anyway, any other last questions? We'll let Chris go, and then we've got a few things to cover. Any other questions out there?
Oh, I'll come to visit you, Chris.
Hopefully we'll be able to welcome you all back to the Butterfly House.
Miles from there.
Chris, could I
Look forward to it.
say again?
I might have to mute everybody again. What was that question for Chris?
Yvonne?
Somebody had a question for Chris there about.
I had a question. Could I see a picture of the cover of the book? I wanted to write that down. The book.
Repeat the author's name, please.
It's David Wagner.
Can
we put that in our minutes and then we'll all be able to look it up?
It'll be there.
Tara
If you
put
look
it in the chat.
If you look in the chat window, you'll see that Tara Morton put the web link to Amazon.com for that book.